Did you email Peggy?
I did.
Did you email Peggy?
I did. Yeah. I can just tell you, too.
That's all.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors meeting of Tuesday, September the 2nd, 2014. I hope everyone had a good legislative recess. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. President. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos present. Supervisor Breed. Breed present. Supervisor Campos. Campos present. President Chu.
Present.
Chu present. Supervisor Cohen. Cohen present. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell present. Supervisor Kim. Kim present. Supervisor Marr. Marr present. Supervisor Tang. Tang present. Supervisor Wiener. Wiener present. Supervisor Yee. Yee present. Mr. President, all members are present.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? Colleagues, we have board meeting minutes of July the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th. Could I have a motion to approve those minutes? Motion by Supervisor Kim, second by Supervisor Tang. Without objection, those meeting minutes are approved. Madam Clerk, are there any communications?
Yes, Mr. President. We are in receipt of a correspondence from Mayor Edwin Lee dated August 19th, 2014, communicating the second declaration of a local emergency relating to the rim fire in the Stanislaus National Forest area, and pursuant to Charter Section 3.100 and Administrative Code Chapter 7, this matter has been placed on the without reference to committee calendar on today's meeting agenda.
And with that, why don't we go to our consent agenda?
Items 1 through 5, the consent calendar, are considered routine in nature. A member can sever an item to have it considered separately.
Colleagues, would anyone like to sever any items? Supervisor Breed.
I'd like to sever item number 4, please.
And with that, let's take a roll call vote on the consent agenda, except for item 4.
Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos?
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed?
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu?
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. There are 11 ayes.
Those ordinances are finally passed. Item 4.
Item 4 is an ordinance amending and updating the police code to reduce restrictions on the location and lessen permitting requirements for mechanical amusement devices and arcades, removing obsolete code provisions and making environmental findings.
Supervisor Breed.
Colleagues, today I have some substantive amendments to this legislation. And I wanted to just talk about those things briefly. After some initial concerns were brought to my attention by members of the Entertainment Commission as well as the San Francisco Police Department, I set out to update the code to simplify it and hopefully make things easier for small businesses. The legislation makes a distinction between bars that have arcade games and other small businesses like a burrito shop or a laundromat that have arcade games as well. This is because the circumstances are a little different for bars, and the Entertainment Commission wants to be able to engage with these particular bars on their good neighbor policy. When I first introduced the legislation, it said that a bar could have one game without needing a permit, but if it had 2 or more games, it would need a permit from the Entertainment Commission. At the Land Use Committee, Supervisor Kim offered an amendment that said a bar could have up to 4 games before needing a permit. I wholeheartedly supported her amendment, and that is what we passed unanimously on July 29th. However, the Entertainment Commission staff and the Police Department expressed some concerns to this change. Namely, they were uncomfortable with the idea of having bars with between 2 and 4 games be exempted from the Good Neighbor policy. So we crafted an alternative approach, and I think it's actually better than what we were proposing to pass. Specifically, the amendments that I'm offering today will maintain the exemption for non-bars that have up to 10 games. It will still allow bars to have one game without needing a permit, and it also creates a streamlined and free process for bars that have between 2 and 10 games. Those bars will be able to apply for a staff-level permit issued by the Entertainment Commission director or his or her designee. The small business owner will not have to go to a hearing before the Entertainment Commission, which was of a major concern to us. They will also not be required to pay the $740 permit fee, application fee, for those particular businesses that have no more than 10 games. And we carefully drafted the language to ensure that the entire process is as quickly and as painless as possible. Though other departments like the planning issue staff-level permits all the time, this is a relatively new structure for the Entertainment Commission. They currently issue staff-level temporary permits, but this will be the first over-the-counter permit for a fixed place of business. I think it's a great step forward in improving the often cumbersome and expensive process the city imposes on small businesses. My amendments also clarify a couple of procedural items in the Business and Tax Code regarding how the Entertainment Commission permits are considered and appealed. The amendments reduce the burden on small businesses while addressing the Entertainment Commission and the police department's concern with oversight. And whereas the current version, bars with 5 to 10 games would have to pay $740 and go before the commission, now they can actually get a staff-level permit for free. My staff presented these amendments to the full Entertainment Commission and the Small Business Commission during the August recess, with the latter voting unanimously to support the legislation. I want to thank Jocelyn Kane, Kami Blackstone, and Glendon Hyde at the Entertainment Commission, who really explained and gave me a perspective of what they're dealing with these particular businesses and how they've been a tremendous support to ensuring that small businesses have great relationships with the surrounding neighborhood. Also, Commanders Garrity and Redmond at the San Francisco Police Department, the Small Business Commission, the Deputy City Attorney, Francisca Gesner, for all of her hard work in making these substantive changes, and my co-sponsors, Supervisor Weiner and Supervisor Kim. Deputy City Attorney Givner advised me that the amendments will require the legislation to come back for another reading next week, but will not require a return to committee. So colleagues, I ask for your support in moving this legislation forward and finally giving Ms. Pac-Man the permit it needs to live on. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Pinball Wizard. And with that, Supervisor Breed has made a motion to amend her ordinance. Could I have a second to that? Seconded by Supervisor Kim. And then I also understand, actually, if we can take that motion to amend without objection, that should be the case. And I understand Supervisor Breed has made a motion to continue this item for 1 week. Second by...
I apologize, President Chu. No, this would be, as a result of making such substantive amendments, this would be considered the first reading, and so it would be up for a second reading for next week.
Okay. So
we would, if we were to pass it today with the amendments, it would be considered a first reading and not a second reading if we had not made the amendments.
Okay, so I understand they are non-substantive, and that being the case, colleagues, can we pass this item on the first read? Without objection, that should be the case, and it will now sit for 1 more week for a second reading next week. Okay. Madam Clerk, why don't we proceed to item 6?
Item 6 is a resolution to designate the following neighborhood and community newspapers to be the outreach newspaper for specific communities or neighborhoods. Small Business Exchange for the African American, Chinese, and Hispanic communities, Tsingtao Daily and the World Journal for the Chinese community, El Reportero for the Hispanic community, the San Francisco Bayview for the African American community, the Bay Area Reporter for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender community, Central City Extra for the Central City neighborhood, the Western Edition for the Western Edition neighborhood, Northside Publications, Marina Times for the Northern San Francisco neighborhoods, the West Portal Monthly for the West Portal neighborhood, and the Potrero View for the Potrero Hill, Dogpatch, Bayview, Soma, and Mission Bay neighborhoods, all to provide outreach advertising for fiscal year 2014 through 15.
Colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, this resolution is adopted. Item 7.
Item 7 is a resolution to approve an emergency public work contract between the Public Utilities Commission and Flatiron West to perform immediate work to repair the Lower Cherry Aqueduct in response to an emergency drought declaration with a contract amount not to exceed $14 million.
Colleagues, same house, same call. This resolution is adopted. Item 8.
Item 8 is an ordinance to create the Underground District Number 360 on Ringgold Alley from 8th Street to 9th Street and making the environmental findings.
Same house, same call. This ordinance is passed in the first read. Colleagues, we do not have any 2:30 special accommodations today that I'm aware of, and since we have a couple of 3 p.m. special orders, why don't we pass over them and head to roll call.
First, to introduce new business, Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and welcome back, everyone. I have a few introductions today. First, I am introducing a hearing request relating to the city's policies for the towing and retrieval of stolen vehicles. Colleagues, I'm sure we all get contacted by constituents about this. Someone's car is stolen. It winds up being dumped somewhere in the city, and it's ultimately towed. And then the person who has done absolutely nothing wrong ends up being responsible for hundreds or even thousands of dollars in towing fees and storage fees and so forth. Currently, when an officer finds a stolen vehicle and identifies it as stolen, the person will have 20 minutes to come to the scene to retrieve the car, because we don't want our officers to be babysitting cars all day long. Obviously, most people are not going to be able to do that. It then gets towed, and if you're a San Francisco resident and the vehicle has been stolen, you have a whopping 4-hour grace period to come and retrieve the car and not pay any storage fees. Sometimes people learn about it well after the fact, maybe even days or weeks after the fact, and then their fees end up just being huge, sometimes more than the value of the car, in which case the car will then be auctioned off because it's not worth actually coming and paying for a car that's worth less than the fee amount. It's not an acceptable situation. We're treating people who have been victimized or victims of crime, we're treating them as if they have done something wrong. And it's not an appropriate way for the city to be treating its residents or visitors of the city or people who live elsewhere whose car is stolen and then dumped in San Francisco. And so the hearing, the purpose is to call in auto return, the police department and the MTA to get clearly on the record what the rules are, what the fee schedule is, and what the actual policies and practices are of these various agencies in terms of dealing with people whose cars have been stolen and then towed. Auto return's contract comes back for or is up for renegotiation next year. I'm a fan of auto return. I think auto return has come in and cleaned up what was a very problematic situation in terms of the city's towing contract. But as this contract is renegotiated, it has to take into account the fact that owners of stolen vehicles should not be treated as if they had illegally parked their cars. And so it'll be an opportunity for us as a board to send a message about how we expect negotiations to proceed, because ultimately this contract will come back to the Board of Supervisors for approval. There should be a longer grace period. There should be reduced fees, if any fees at all, for people whose cars have been stolen and then towed. I also have 2 in memoriams for today, both very tragic. The first is for Nancy Roddick, who is a resident of Noe Valley. Nancy was a Noe Valley native who passed away on August 5th. She graduated from Lowell High School in 1965. She was always active in Noe Valley, active member of St. Philip's Parish, and helped to found the parish's daycare center. She was married to Bob Roddick, who is the president of the Noe Valley Merchants and Professionals Association, and the two have 3 children. So Nancy was someone who was just universally admired in the neighborhood, and her passing is a real tragedy. The second is another a very sad situation. My second in memoriam is my apologies. My second in memoriam is for Brian Higgins, who is also known in the community as Feather, who was an active member of the Radical Fairies and someone who was just very well liked in the community. He had lived in San Francisco for about 5 years, worked at Rosenberg's Deli on Noe Street, and he was attacked and rendered unconscious on August 10th. Was in the hospital for 3 days before he passed away. At first, no one knew who Feather was, and there was a call put out in the community, and ultimately he was identified. The investigation is ongoing. We don't know exactly what happened. There is a video. It does show that Feather was assaulted, and I think this attack and this death has a lot of people on edge in the neighborhood. The Castro Upper Market area has always been for many, many years a haven for the LGBT community. And when we have people being attacked and dying in our neighborhood, it really reminds us that even though this neighborhood is a refuge, it is bad things happen, and we all have to be very, very vigilant, and we have to work very hard to make our community safe, not just for the LGBT community, but for everyone. And the rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. Supervisor Yee. Submit. Okay. Supervisor Avalos.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, I have two resolutions for introduction. They're both resolutions that are urging Congress to take action on two important issues. The first one is the use of non-therapeutic antibiotics in our agricultural systems. Bill pending before Congress. We have a lot of health impacts that come down to us at various levels in our cities and counties and rural areas based on antibiotics that are used for non-therapeutic uses on livestock. These have tremendous costs that are incurred by our public health agencies and also people's pocketbooks to maintain their health when they receive infections. The use of non-therapeutic antibiotics also increases the resistance of bacteria that get into our cattle, and the use of banning the use of non-therapeutic antibiotics will help to reduce the resistance of these bacteria that get into our food. And so urging Congress to pass legislation in that vein. Following the Democratic County Central Committee vote on a revenue-neutral carbon tax, I have introduced a resolution urging Congress to immediately pass revenue-neutral carbon tax. The way the tax would work is that there'll be a tax on as high up in the economic stream as possible, or at the port of entry of the United States, tax on carbon and fossil fuels. But then the other part of the revenue-neutral side of the tax would be a tax credit that would go to working class and middle class households, so that they would not see the impact of the actual tax itself, and the tax would actually directly affect the production of oil, and in the hopes of actually enabling greater measures to reduce oil consumption and production. I have one other measure for introduction. It is a lease disposition and development agreement for the Geneva office building, otherwise known as the Car Barn. The Car Barn is a landmark building in deep need of repair. It's on the corner of Geneva Avenue and San Jose in District 11. It's part of District 11 and San Francisco that is in desperate need of real change and investment. There's been about 10 years of work, at least 10 years of work that the community has put forward to raising money and raising awareness of the needs of renovating this building. And there's a great plan in place once we receive funding to be able to have youth programming, economic development programming, and arts programming here at the facility. It'll be a world-class site. Already we have had really great design work by Aileen Darling Design that has done pro bono work to support this project. The design is beautiful, but part of the effort to raising money is putting in place many of the issues that need to get put in place, environmental review. This resolution, lease and disposition and development agreement, references the categorical exemption from environmental review. It also ensures that we have all the documents in place to move forward on this project. So that'll be going to committee, and look forward to your support on this project. The rest I'll submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. Supervisor Campos.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Welcome back, everyone. I have one item today, and I'm here to talk about a very important issue, and I know that it's an issue that we have heard a lot about in the last few weeks, and that's the issue of the crisis that is facing our country as we have tens of thousands of children who are fleeing violence in Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. Gangs have effectively taken over parts of these countries. Many of these towns and cities in these countries are run by these gangs to the extent that many parents are unfortunately making the impossible decision to actually send their kids on a very, very dangerous journey from these countries to the United States. They hire what is usually known as a coyote who is a complete stranger whose job is to bring the child over to the United States. About 63,000 unaccompanied kids have been apprehended at the border in the first 10 months of this year alone, and many of these kids are released to the custody of a relative or a friend in places like the San Francisco Bay Area. When that occurs, the child's legal status is adjudicated in places like our own San Francisco Immigration Court. And I think that when the history of the Obama administration is written, I think that this will be one of the saddest moments in the tenure of this president, because this is truly a crisis that was created by this administration. The idea that you would expedite tens of thousands of cases without true consideration for ensuring that these kids, and then in each one of those cases, there is legal representation. During the legislative break, I went to the immigration court to observe how the immigration proceedings and what is now being described as the rocket docket, how that's working out. And it was truly one of the most heartbreaking experiences that I've seen. The room that I visited was filled with children and their guardians who were simply terrified. They had no idea what was happening. We asked the children, we asked some of the family members that were there if they had tried to get legal representation. And one of the individuals, as an example, simply said, that they had called every single organization on a handout that was given to them, but they never received a response. And of course, this was very challenging, and even the judge in that case, Judge Griswold, who I think is, like so many of these judges, doing the very best they can, when he addressed the room, the first thing he told these kids and their families was that they needed to get a lawyer. And of course, that is simply one thing that they could not do. Faced with this crisis, and a lot has been said about different ways in which these kids should be helped, notwithstanding the pretty poor reporting at the local level and other places of this issue, this is a very complicated matter. And so we wanted to make sure that as we move forward as a city in figuring out how to address and deal with this crisis, that we actually based our proposal on facts. So my office, working with members of the community, asked the budget and legislative analysts to conduct a study to ascertain what it would take to ensure that every child, every individual who is currently involved in the rocket docket here in San Francisco Immigration Court, that every individual receives full scope legal representation. I want to thank Harvey Rose and Fred Broussard in particular, who has been leading this effort. And there's a report that they issued today that has been released, and my hope is that each and every one of you has received a copy of that report and will take the time to read it. But what this report finds is really scary. We are lucky in San Francisco that we have some of the best nonprofits, not only in the area but in the country. But yet, the magnitude of this crisis is something that we as a region and we as a city have not been ready to face. The Budget and Legislative Analyst Report projects that the caseload in immigration court here in San Francisco will increase dramatically. There is an expectation based on current statistics, and they interviewed a number of attorneys and a number of immigrants themselves, and they went to also speak and observe the court, that they expect that about 2,533 cases for fiscal year 2013-2014 will be part of the rocket docket. If you subtract an estimated 403 cases that are already in place, you're talking about 2,130 cases per year, where you have 2,130 cases where you're talking about children that will not receive legal representation here in San Francisco Immigration Court. This report also estimates that to provide legal representation for this estimated 2,130 children, that it would require about 53.2 attorneys. That's based on an average caseload of about 40 cases per attorney per year. If you look at the total amount that it would actually take for the region to provide legal representation in all of these 2,130 cases, you're talking about $6.2 million that would be needed so that we ensure that every child has that representation. In thinking about how to move forward, we wanted to have a measured approach that recognized that this is not just a San Francisco problem, but it's actually a regional problem. And in their report, the Budget and Legislative Analyst estimates that 20% of the 2,130 children, 20% of those cases that are part of the rocket docket are children that are residing in San Francisco. 20%. So based on that estimation, we are arriving at a supplemental request of $1.2 million for each one of the next 2 years. $1.2 million represents 20% of the entire need that is outlined in the Budget and Legislative Analyst Report. We have been in discussions in my office, not only with community members, but also with the Mayor's Office, specifically with Brian Chu of the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, about the need to provide legal defense to these kids. And we appreciate and certainly welcome the consideration that has been given by the Mayor's Office. Seeking a supplemental is not an easy thing to do. It's not something that you do lightly. But the reality is that we have a very serious crisis, and something should be done. I want to thank my colleagues who are with me co-sponsoring this request. Supervisor Avalos, Supervisor Yee, and Supervisor Marr. We look forward to having a robust conversation at the Budget and Finance Committee where we can talk about what the right level of investment in these kids actually is. We recognize that we in San Francisco are not alone in trying to do something about this issue. We are grateful that there is discussions by the state that Governor Brown and the California legislature have appropriated $3 million for legal services for children who are part of the rocket docket. However, these funds will be $3 million statewide, and we anticipate that only a very small fraction of that will end up being sent to the San Francisco Bay Area. We also acknowledge that Attorney General Kamala Harris has convened private foundations and firms asking them to fund legal services. And while we are hopeful that something will come of that, we have been informed by many of these foundations that they will not be able to provide the needed resources to address this crisis. We also note that as we at this board and the mayor in San Francisco consider this proposal, that we're also working with a coalition in Alameda County that will also be asking that local government in Alameda County to step up and provide some funding so that it's not just San Francisco addressing the needs of these kids. You know, a lot of people have asked and will ask, you know, why is it that this is important? And I just want to note a couple of points. One, that under international law and under U.S. immigration law, many of these kids would actually qualify as refugees, and many of them have cases that would allow them to be protected by immigration law in the United States. The problem is that those protections cannot be accorded unless the person actually has legal representation. There was a study that was done by the Syracuse University Immigration Project that found that unrepresented immigrant juveniles were ordered deported or faced deportation 9 out of 10 cases. But that when that child, that juvenile had legal representation, that in almost half of those cases, when there was an attorney present, that case was actually successful. So having legal representation does matter. And then I will end with the following statement that was provided by a researcher in the area of immigration, a law professor, Savitri Taylor, who said, "We must choose carefully how we treat the stranger among us, because our choice has serious implications for the stranger, but also for ourselves. How we choose to deal with this crisis has serious implications for these children, but it also has serious implications for who we are and what we are as a country. And I believe that we in San Francisco should set the example for ensuring that at a minimum, these kids are accorded the legal rights that our Constitution and international law provide them." The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. President Chu.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, first of all, I have two difficult in memoriams today. First, I would ask that we move to adjourn this afternoon's board meeting in memory of Mary Atchison, who until her untimely death this past week was a resident in our city in Bernal Heights. Tragically, she was a victim of a domestic violence homicide. This year, we know that there are several deaths that are still being investigated that are likely related to domestic violence, and we know that every tragedy is one too many for our city. Mary was well liked in her community, extremely well respected by her employer, Wikia. She was a zoologist, a skier, a fan of both the Giants and the 49ers, who carried the spirit of our city into her life and into our community. Her friends have told us that she was an extremely vibrant, happy, wonderful person. She would be missed. And as we memorialize Mary Atchison, let us also continue to resolve to do all that we can work on together to even more stridently end domestic violence tragedies in our city. Today, I also want to recognize the passing of Zach Watson. Zach passed away at San Francisco General Hospital on August the 16th after having been hit in a traffic collision while walking his bicycle. He was 29 years old. He was a designer and a developer, an extraordinary home chef, an avid swing dancer, an ardent sailor, and a beloved son, brother, and friend of hundreds in our city. He approached his life with zeal and curiosity. He loved to build and tinker, and his mind was an encyclopedia of knowledge. He was known for extravagant dinners, amazing pies, and he became the glue between an amazingly diverse group of friends who celebrated his life with his family with a memorial gathering at the Exploratorium on August the 23rd. And his friends have set up a donation account to support some of Zach's favorite things: La Cucina, the Swing Dance Society, the Cal Sailing Club, the San Francisco Zen Center, and the Exploratorium. And I do understand there's a fellowship that is being named in his honor. I do want to share one story about Zach that I think is very important of note. In the spring of 2012, Zach volunteered his data analysis skills to provide much-needed information about traffic collisions to our city. The data he put together gave the San Francisco SFPD, the MTA, and transit advocates the ability to identify and prioritize the most dangerous intersections in our city. It was instrumental in the development of many of our street safety projects and our Vision Zero initiative. The information Zach provided had usually taken 2 years to be processed at the state level and sent back to local agencies. Zach did the work in 2 hours and never asked for recognition. And so it is all the more heartbreaking and tragic that he was able to make this contribution to our city only to lose his life as a result of a traffic collision. On behalf of our city, I want to offer our condolences to Zach's family and friends. I know Zach's mother is in our room. I want to thank you for your son. Your son will be dearly missed. On a policy matter, colleagues, in the spring, as you know, I proposed legislation to regulate short-term rentals for the first time in our city, addressing online platforms such as Airbnb, VRBO, HomeAway, and others. My proposal was crafted to address the policy issues as they impact San Francisco during our housing affordability crisis. Under our proposal, for the first time, city government would finally regulate and enforce our city laws to ensure that landlords or tenants who take entire buildings or units off the housing market year-round to use them as de facto hotels or bed and breakfasts would no longer be able to engage in this activity, with $1,000 per day penalties and potential criminal penalties that would apply to such actors. On the other hand, we've all heard from thousands of San Franciscans struggling to make monthly rent and mortgages, who are seniors on fixed incomes, students, working families, or workers traveling for their jobs. Our legislation would allow any permanent resident who lives in San Francisco for at least 9 months of the year to engage in limited shareable housing activity on online platforms if they register with the city, pay full taxes, get liability insurance, and abide by other rules. We've received feedback from literally at this point thousands of San Franciscans, many of whom I believe you've probably heard from. I want to take a moment and thank the Planning Department for their significant consideration on our legislation as well as their good suggestions. During the legislative recess, the Planning Commission heard our measure, supported our proposal with recommended changes, and today I'm introducing substitute legislation with many of the amendments captured by the public feedback in 4 categories. First, we're introducing our substitute legislation to include provisions that continue to strengthen enforcement, to consolidate enforcement from the 2 agencies that we had initially thought about into one agency, moving the responsibility to the Planning Department, increasing administrative penalties for repeat violations, and requiring the issuance of registration numbers for anyone who wants to engage in this activity to accompany the approval of any short-term rental activity, with residents being required to include registration numbers in any posting. Secondly, our substitute legislation would also, for the first time, capture single-family homes. It would require residents of single-family homes to register with the city for permission and compliance with principal place of residence requirements. Third, our substitute legislation includes amendments to reinforce and protect affordable housing, to reinforce the exclusion of subsidized and affordable housing from participation in this activity, particularly for below market rate BMR units, as well as single-room occupancy units. And then fourth, we're including amendments to ensure building and fire safety compliance. We would deny permission for this activity to units that have outstanding building, electrical, plumbing, mechanical, fire, health, housing, or planning code violations, including notices of violation, notices to cure, orders to cease and desist, or other correction notices. want to let colleagues know we are asking the Land Use Committee to hear this legislation on September the 15th, and I know if you have questions that we'll be able to have a public dialogue about this and look forward to moving this through the process. The last item I have, I want to let you know about an announcement that I made during the August recess about our new Right to Civil Counsel program for immigrants facing deportation proceedings. Colleagues, you may remember in 2012, this Board of Supervisors unanimously passed our Right to Civil Counsel ordinance, supporting the goal that individuals should have an attorney in civil legal proceedings, regardless of income, when they're about to be denied a basic human need, just as individuals have a constitutional right to an attorney in criminal proceedings. After we passed our ordinance, we first launched a program for tenants facing evictions, and our tenant right to civil counsel pilot has been extremely successful. A recent Stanford report found that $100,000 of initial funding leveraged over $2 million of pro bono legal services to provide representation for over 1,000 tenants. Back in 2012, our coalition also said that we intended the second phase of this program to be for immigrants facing deportation proceedings. Months ago, in late spring, during the normal budget process, I asked our budget committee to include a $100,000 add back over 2 years to expand our Right to Civil Counsel program. And I want to thank all of you for unanimously supporting this in this year's budget. After a competitive RFP, we announced that the city has awarded this funding to the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, who expect to train up to 400 attorneys to provide pro bono legal representation to undocumented immigrants facing deportation, particularly for unaccompanied children from Central America. The Lawyers Committee has had a long track record of leveraging each dollar of funding into $80 of legal representation. And in other words, we are hopeful that $100,000 could stretch to up to $8 million of pro bono legal services each year. Now, a few thoughts on the supplemental that we just heard about. First, we need to work together to meet the needs of unaccompanied children and other immigrants facing deportation rather than working on competing efforts. To this end, we all share the same goal of helping these children and want to figure out how our city of St. Francis can do that in the most humane, timely, and cost-effective way possible. Second, I want to also acknowledge other important efforts in this area. Mayor Lee's administration has tasked his city departments to work together with communities to respond to the specific needs of these young people, to assist with shelter, social services, legal assistance, and language services. And I want to appreciate their efforts. My office has also worked with our Attorney General, Kamala Harris, who has joined the call for the legal community to step up. And as was previously mentioned, this past week, at the request of state leaders, our state legislature passed SB 1476, which includes $3 million of similar funding to nonprofit organizations to provide legal help for unaccompanied youth. And I do hope that this is funding that can help us to meet our local needs. And with that, I look forward to the conversation that we will have to again ensure that San Francisco remains a sanctuary for immigrants and children from around the world. The rest of my items I will submit.
Thank you, Mr. President. Supervisor Cohen.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be back. Hello, folks at home. Two legislative matters I'd like to discuss today. First, I'm introducing legislation to declare September Infant Mortality Awareness Month in San Francisco. Every year, over 24,000 infants die in the United States, and in San Francisco, that number is nearly 1,600. The infant mortality rate, particularly around the African American community, is 7.2 per 1,000 live births. Now, in contrast, that's 4.3 per 1,000 births for Latino families and 2.2 per 1,000 live births among Caucasians. So as you can see, there's a huge disparity in infant mortality and the infant mortality rate. This means that the African American infants are dying at a 3 times.
If we could ask folks to limit their conversations, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. This means that the African American infants are dying at 3 times the rate of white infants. And over the last year, I've been part of a collaborative team called Equity and Young Black Women's Health and Birth Outcomes. And this is a team of experts looking at causes and solutions to these extraordinarily high disparities among the minority community. Now, some of the causes go much further than individual life choices and poverty. They include socioeconomic, stress, and cultural as well as environmental conditions. So the first step is to bring awareness to this issue, which is why today I'm introducing this resolution to declare September Infant Mortality Month inside San Francisco. The second piece of legislation is an introduction for a resolution to accept a population-based state grant in the amount of $250,000 to fund recidivism and crime reduction programs in our city. Now, as we continue as a city to look for various methods to quell the problem of violence and change our thinking about violence as a uni-departmental or neighborhood-specific issue, and we begin to come up with solutions as if we are solving a public health issue, then we as a city, and largely as a community, will be much healthier, and we will continue to be the great city that San Francisco so strives to be. To date, there have been 104 shootings, 25 homicides, and 20 of those homicides were committed with a gun. Now, we can never say that we're a successful city until there are 0 shootings as well as 0 homicides. We've come a long way, because since 2007 and 2008, when those numbers were more than 3 times larger, the homicide rate was 3 times larger in 2007 and 2008. But we can do more to continue to strive to keep our citizens safe. This grant that is to be given out to the community-based organizations will go a long way to help us to continue the collaboration to end violence in our city. Thank you, Madam Clerk and Mr. President. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Cohen. Supervisor Farrell. Thank you, Supervisor Farrell. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. Actually, I had prepared an in memoriam for Mr. Zach Watson as well, so I'd just like to add my name to that in memoriam. I know that the incident occurred on the boundary lines of District 6 and District 3 on Post and Jones, and just also convey my condolences to the family and friends on behalf of myself and also my office. I know that Sunny Angula in my office had visited the hospital several times and knew Zach well. And also wanted to note that many of us actually saw Zach's work here in Chambers. He famously did the map visualizing the shuttle bus program from San Francisco to Silicon Valley. And so actually his work has been here in Chambers. And it is incredibly sad to know that he will no longer be with us. But he was incredibly gifted and talented and wonderful from the words that I've heard from his friends. And he will be dearly, dearly missed. I also wanted to submit an in memoriam on behalf of Miana Gregory, who is another child, 2 years old, that was hit and run on Mission Street between 4th and 5th outside of the Metreon Theater on August 15. The Friday evening after seeing a movie with her family. It's an unfortunate hit-and-run incident. Many of you may have seen the photo that SFPD has put out showcasing a white car, and that if anyone has any information on this vehicle, that they should report that to the anonymous tip line at SFPD. And just continue to be committed to our work. While these 2 cases are not the usual pedestrian fatalities that we hear or read about in San Francisco, it still continues to demonstrate the importance of the policy and work that we have in place to make sure that we are preventing these absolutely preventable deaths here in San Francisco. And the rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Marr.
Submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Marr. Mr. President, seeing no other names on the roster, that concludes roll call for the introduction of new business.
Thank you. Why don't we now go to general public comment?
At this time, the public may comment generally for up to 2 minutes on items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board, including items on the adoption without reference to committee calendar. Please note that public comment is not allowed on those items which have already been subject to public comment by a board committee. Pursuant to Board Rule 4.22, direct your remarks to the board as a whole, not to individual supervisors and nor to the audience. Speakers using translation assistance will be allowed twice the amount of time to testify, and if you would like a document to be displayed on the overhead projector, please clearly state such and remove the document when you would like the screen to return to live coverage of the meeting.
Thank you. First speaker.
Saturday, Sunday, August 30, 31st. I attended the 2 days, all-day event from 10 to 5, the Supervisors Expo Center, the Singtown Expo. Weekday, today, I met thousands of new friends, boys and girls. And also, they're coming up Thursday, 6 p.m. trial time. There's an open barbecue provided by the Triple Police Force. So about the safety. And also, this coming Saturday, Sunday, September 6, 7, also to the event, the trial time Mid-Autumn Moon Festival. So everyone should attend. Quick fun, 2 days. Yes.
Honorable President Chu, honored members of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. My name is Reuben David Goodman, and I am a City and County of San Francisco retiree who was employed at the Assessor's Office. I am also a dual-diagnosed mental health consumer who participates in the Mission Act program. First off, President Chu, I'd like to add to your remarks earlier, and that's that deaf, dumb, and blind kid sure plays a mean pinball. It's my unfortunate duty to bring to the attention of this board an anti-Semitic incident that occurred at the Rhoda Goldman Elegant Assisted Living facility. This is a facility where my stepmother, Beatrice Goodman, resides at a cost to my father, Ben Goodman's estate of $7,000 per month. What had occurred was I went to visit my stepmother, Beatrice Goodman, and it was before my daughter Muriel Lila's birthday. I took a card to her already addressed and stamped. Upon entering the facility, as I was near the elevators, I took out my cell phone and was about to begin making a call when an employee of the facility said, "You're not allowed to make cell phone calls." Unfortunately for me, upon attempting to exit the facility, my cell phone went off just as I was stepping off the elevator. To be continued. Thank you very much.
Mr. Goodman, you have 25 seconds left.
Anyone who's interested in getting more details, my cell phone number is area code 415-559-5796, and tomorrow I'll be reporting to the Human Rights Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors, Madam Clerk. I'm taking this opportunity to present a matter that warrants your attention. It saddens me that we hear all too often in the news reporting surrounding the abduction of children, of students being truant, students being separated from their groups during school excursions, and senior citizens suffering from dementia that wanders off. In some cases, never be found. Technology is available in mitigating instances of what I just presented to you in the form of radio frequency identification tags. By placing an RFID tags on an article of clothing, we can curb the displacement of loved ones. We can start by mandating the children on school excursions wearing a bright colored shirt, the school name emblazoned on the back, along with an RFID tag sold into an area of the shirt. Additionally, faculties and staff members should be required to wear a shirt or jackets displaying their photo identification. If a child is discovered having been truant or separated from a group, he or she then can locate it by a tracking device. Further, all schools should be required to have on file a 5x7 photo of the entire student body for the purpose of assisting law enforcement and other child advocacy organizations located missing children. All students should be issued a see-through backpack for security purposes. The greatest assets in any community are its people, and it is our civic responsibility to take this action when it pertains to the welfare and safety of our fellow men, women, and child. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Good afternoon. John DiNanno, San Francisco. A little satire here. Take the bus and leave the driving to them. Down in the southwest part of the country, some people may try and bring their horses on the bus with them. Did you ever have a horse step on your toes? I haven't, but I have had a wheelchair with a 300-pound person in it roll over my toes. Or have you had a baby carriage with a live baby in it and its 100-day supply of clean diapers? And of course, we must bring our 50-pound backpacks with an ample water supply and a 2 weeks supply of clean underwear just in case we get lost. And of course, our guide dog to help us find our way back home. Walkers are a must for most people with non-functioning legs, and we need ample seating for people with non-functioning bodies. Shopping carts with a year's supply of food and whatever. I feel sorry for bus drivers who are given an assignment to drive a bus across this crazy town without driving over anybody's toes or over a cat, and to be punctual about it. I'd be more than willing to leave the driving to them if I could get on the damn bus. But the burning question today is can the infrastructure of this city handle the growing population? Thank you for listening.
Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Patrick McCann. I own Greenworks Inc. I'm a local-owned business down at the San Francisco Flower Market since 2001. Since 1956, the Organization of Growers has operated at the corner of 6th Street and Brannan. Over 100 vendors operate in a block of buildings owned and run by the San Francisco Flower Growers Association. I'm here today on behalf of widening the effort to save the San Francisco Flower Mart. We're a coalition of flower vendors and florists, tenants, wholesalers, and concerned citizens. Our livelihoods are at risk. A Los Angeles developer publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange, Kilroy Realty, are in the process of acquiring the property with no real legal guarantees for locally owned businesses occupying the space. Kilroy is seeking to merge with or acquire outright the San Francisco Flower Growers Association for $26.5 million in stocks and cash. The Flower Growers Association shareholders vote to approve this acquisition of the historic South of Market property September 11th. Next week, we need your help now. For 102 years, our hardworking vendors, suppliers, and growers work to give you the best quality of flowers here in San Francisco and preserve the pulse and heart of the flower industry in Northern California. We are one of two growers markets left in the United States and responsible for 19,000 jobs, producing $2.5 million per day in salaries and wages, $5.5 million per day in total economic impact of business activity created by cut flower growers. Longtime tenants' leases expire in 130 days. Thus far, Kilroy has refused to guarantee that they will not displace.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Board. My name is Jonathan Cantor. I'm a homeowner in San Francisco's Richmond District. I support home sharing and encourage the Board to give due consideration to the benefits of home sharing and permit its legitimization with as few restrictions as possible. Your action will ensure that San Francisco homeowners and tenants can home share without fear of reprisal by landlords or local authorities and allow the city to easily collect the millions of dollars of occupancy tax that is rightly due. Our short-term rental has provided emergency housing to two different San Francisco tenants who were victims of fire. They were able to stay with us while their landlords could make necessary repairs to their apartments. More importantly, the supplemental income we receive from home sharing has allowed my wife the opportunity to devote her time to our 11-year-old autistic son so that he can grow up and become a fully included San Francisco resident. Please consider this legislation and act expediently. Thank you.
Next speaker.
First, I'd like to commend the board and Mr. Rose for taking up the cause of representation for undocumented children. That's a fabulous thing. But talking about B&B, as a former teacher, I'm not usually at a loss for words nor uncomfortable, which I am right now. And yet, being a senior more than 3/4 of a century old, I wish I could find the words to move you. I definitely believe that B&Bs should be regulated and pay their 14%. But I beg of you that as a body of 9, you not overregulate, particularly in regards to seniors and single-family home owners who have resided year-round and continue to do so. Airbnb one small room with no kitchen in the Western Addition, rented to Zion and Kaiser patient families way below market rate. We've been there in that area for over 40 years. We also rented to other visitors, obviously. It has allowed us to pay for dental work put off too long in my case, and to pay for house repairs and improve the area and the residents. By baby steps, Airbnb is helping us to get from under some of these costs. What we're getting from Airbnb in one small room is helping us pay for the necessities. I ask that in your deliberations you allow single-family owners and seniors more days per year, preferably year-round. And I have to say that it would help people like us who are in our 70s and 80s. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Burgess, and I'm also here to indicate my support of home sharing. I am a homeowner in Russian Hill area, luckily enough, and the only way that I can help stay in San Francisco, I was born and raised here, but in order to continue living here, I rent out my place when I go away or when I'm working out of town, and it helps me pay my mortgage, and it helps me live in the city that I grew up in and that I love. I'm self-employed. I work for myself. I'm a massage therapist, and I need this extra income to help me live the life that I want to live here in San Francisco. So I just have a lot. I didn't write anything like anyone else did. They all were really good about that, and I didn't write. I just came down here because this was the only time I could come. I couldn't come for the 15th to do something more. So I'm just highly in support of the Airbnb home sharing. I'd like to get this legislation pushed through. I would like to remove some of the restrictions, especially for homeowners, about the only 90 days a year. I would like to expand that. I think Airbnb and home sharing is actually a great asset to our city. I don't have issues with paying the hotel tax or that sort of thing, but I think that this is the kind of city we are. We're a sharing city, so I just want to make myself known. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Thank you for having us. My name is Karen Cancino, and I live in the Western Addition, and we've been there almost 40 years. I wanted to just sort of share with you, my husband shared some things, but another way that we've been able to utilize the extra money that we get from Airbnb is to help support our son at this point by helping pay off his law school tuition. At the time he entered law school, we were not able to help at all. And we now are able to, now that we've been using Airbnb to provide more money. we're doing this not just because he's not a corporate lawyer. He chose to be a nonprofit law person, and so it goes along with our values of providing to the community. I'm a retired social worker. My husband's a retired teacher. So our values are very strong to give back to the community. That's what our son's doing. And we're now able to help him with the very high cost of law school that he is trying to pay off. And so I thank you very much. I hope you will consider this legislation. The one thing I would like to add is that I hope you don't limit homeowners like us who are in our house year-round to prevent us from having a limit on the number of days, because we never know when people are going to want us, and it would be very hard to decide when to limit. To cut times off. So thank you very much for hearing us.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, Madeline Savitt, founder and representative of Folks for Polk Folks. I want to thank the board very, very much for their concern and their proactivity on behalf of the welfare of many, many people in the form of the natural disaster preparedness. We've dodged a bullet this time with the recent earthquake, and I think that's because of the action that we've taken. I'm sure that it is. And also the efforts to address the needs of children who very much need it, and also infant mortality in this city and in this country, which, as we may know, is way down the list for developed countries. I'm here to discuss another public health issue, which actually is somewhat hidden and dispersed. All of you have had some involvement with Vision Zero, and I really want to urge people to talk to the mayor and to push even harder on the efforts to fund transportation, which in turn will have the knock-on effect of creating safer streets. I know a young woman who was actually witness to the car crash that killed Zach Watson, and she was deeply traumatized by it. I'm sorry, I'm getting very distraught talking about it, but she was very traumatized by it, and cannot understand why we can't protect citizens who are just using the streets. The rate, as we know it, is about 3 people per day, and we really, really have to work very hard to bring that down. We have the knowledge, the resources, we have the talent, we need the political will, and please push harder on that. Thank you.
Thanks. Next speaker.
Welcome, and thank you for letting us speak today. My name is Gio Belaires. I'm from District 8, and that's the Castro. I'm here to help support home sharing, and the reason I'm here to support home sharing is because I'm a tenant. I was very fortunate to have 2 great landlords. One passed away, and then therefore the building came up for sale, and the new owner did not want me to be a home share. So I abide by the law. I closed down, and I'm here to say that home sharing is probably the best thing that has ever happened to my life. And not only the city's life, and your lives, and your districts. There's a thing that wasn't ever mentioned in a lot of the topics about home sharing, but also the people that have been starting the home sharing or with Airbnb. And that is the amount of hours that they have given freely to make the parks beautiful, SROs painted, high schools painted, and their grounds manicured, and also for the kitchens to produce vegetables for the classrooms. And Airbnb had brought in 400 people from other countries on their own dime to support our city, and we made 4,000 volunteer hours on one Saturday throughout the whole city. That is part of home sharing, and that is what we want to do. And thank you for your time. I do hope that you let this go forward as soon as possible. I'll see you the 15th. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. I'm Dave Masson, and I coordinate the San Francisco chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. I'd like to say a couple of words about the resolution urging Congress to pass a revenue-neutral carbon tax. We want to thank Supervisor Avalos for introducing the resolution and his staff, Jeremy Pollack, for his thoughtful improvements to the whereas. We also thank all the supervisors who have told us they will support. It was a pleasure for me to work with my own supervisor, Scott Wiener. If we didn't talk with your office about this, please don't take it personally. We mostly approached offices where we had a member living in the district, but we would have loved to talk with you, and we would have. But when we reached 7 supervisors committed or leaning to support, and John stepped up, we thought, well, let's go, and we hope the rest of you will join in. At John's suggestion, I sent each of you a letter about this last week. The resolution is substantively identical to one that was passed by the DCCC in February. There's just a little more detail. San Francisco has always pushed the envelope on clean energy and bringing down emissions, and we hope that the board will join the DCCC in asking Congress to take national action with this policy, which is good for the economy and also brings down emissions. Thanks.
Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Andrew Kingsdale, and I am an environmental lawyer and also a volunteer for Citizens Climate Lobby and a proud resident of District 5. And I'm also here to voice my support for the resolution urging Congress to enact a revenue-neutral carbon tax. Climate change is one of the greatest threats that we face in the world today and our future generations will face. And I'm really grateful that I live in a city and a state that has made it a priority to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But unfortunately, there's only so much that one city and one state can do. It's time now for Congress to act. As part of my job, I represent nonprofits that work very hard to enforce regulations, air quality regulations, and climate-related laws. And this is gratifying work. Unfortunately, I've seen firsthand how inadequate these laws and regulations are. They're not nearly comprehensive enough or strong enough to achieve the levels of greenhouse gas reductions that we need now. The quickest and most equitable way that we can achieve these reductions is through a well-designed national tax on carbon, such as the one that's outlined in the resolution. So I want to thank you for adding your voice to this movement, and I especially want to thank Supervisor Avalos and his staff for their leadership, and thank all the other supervisors for their support as well.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Ashley, and I live in the Excelsior District, and I am in support of home sharing. I've been a host for a year, and like everyone has said, this has been the best thing in my life as well. And in this small year, I have seen financial benefits in my community, the amount of money it's brought to the city. My small district of the Excelsior, it's definitely put it on the map, supported our local businesses, our family-owned businesses all up and down the Excelsior. We live green, we're hosts, we want to support the city, we want, like he said, we contribute to the community in all aspects. We make our homes green, we share everything we have, and the people benefiting are our guests relocating here, our guests coming to visit, our guests spending money, the city spreading its ideas, and us contributing as a whole to uplifting everyone personally, emotionally, financially, our districts, our businesses, and absolutely it could benefit from regulation, but it needs to be approached sensitively, as every situation is different. And we do hope and want to support in anything we could do to pay taxes, to keep this going, to keep it allowing, everyone to financially, personally, emotionally gain from the way I have, the way we all want to share that we have, and the way that I've seen. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speakers.
Good afternoon, supervisors, and welcome back to the fall session. My name is Nancy Rock, and I'm a 20-year resident of the Mission District. I'm here to talk to you today about domestic violence. That, as you have already said, we've seen a resurgence in domestic violence homicides. The district attorney last weekend at the Women's Equality Day said that he has been surprised that we have seen so much more violence and homicide as it relates to the domestic violence arena. And so I know that you have been working very hard. I know that our Status of Women have been working very hard, and certainly our community groups with Beverly Upton leading the way have been working really hard to make this stop, but it isn't stopping. And so what I'm asking is that we all work together and bring us in, bring the average community, the average citizen in to help you solve this problem. Because, boy, we really do need. And last, what I'd like to say is thank you for memorializing the domestic violence homicide from last week. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Beverly Upton, and I'm the Executive Director of the San Francisco Domestic Violence Consortium. I want to thank President Chu for his in memoriam for Mary Atchison. Several of us just returned from the Hall of Justice for the arraignment in the death of Mary Atchison. I think between the last few homicides that we've seen this year, reports going up, the arrest of San Francisco 49er Ray McDonald over the weekend, we know that the world is watching and that we have lots to do. This city can do it. We've gone almost 4 years in the past without a domestic violence homicide, so we are just here to ask us all to redouble our efforts, work together, and let's try to go for another 4 years. We've had what will probably end up being 3, if not 4, domestic violence homicides since the beginning of the year. So we appreciate your efforts, and we stand ready to join you. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
The overhead, please.
SFGov TV, if you could hit the overhead. Thank you.
Tom Gilberti. 4 years ago, the World Cup final. Rough game, Dutch against Spain. Neither team had been in the final before. Lots of yellow cards, and a picture in the 28th minute. Here's a leg going into the chest of a player. Universal collective groan across the world. We just had another universal collective groan a couple of weeks ago when the United States announced that it was going to resupply bombs, mortars, and bullets to Israel. 1967, Martin Luther King basically said governments that pay more money to war than lift up the people in poverty have lost their moral direction. He was right. $14 million a day to Israel to carve up an apartheid. The West Bank, lay siege to Gaza. In Detroit, we turn off the water to 20,000 people in Detroit because capitalism corporations have left. Supreme Court saying racism discrimination is over, yet in Ferguson, 70% black people are ruled by 94% police force that's white, 94% that's white. And here, our last session, we had a black group of people come over and say their community needs help. Their community is under siege. And the Supreme Court says there's no racism in this country anymore. We have lost our moral compass. The New Yorker cover this week, hands up, overhead please, hands up, don't shoot is the cover, is the comment on that. Also, there's a good article on how money affects Congress. Is that it?
Thank you very much. Let me ask if there are any other members of the public that wish to speak in general public comment. See none. General public comment is now closed. Madam Clerk, why don't we go to the adoption calendar?
Items 18 through 29 are being considered for immediate adoption without committee reference. If a member objects, a matter can be removed and considered separately.
Colleagues, would anyone like to sever any of these items? See none. Roll call on items 18 through 29.
Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos? Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed? Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu?
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim? Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. There are 11 ayes.
The items are approved and adopted. Why don't we now go to our first 3 p.m. special order? Madam Clerk, could you call items 9 through 12?
Items 9 through 12 comprise the special order at 3 p.m. Pursuant to 2 resolutions adopted July 15th and further, item 18 adopted today, the Board of Supervisors will convene a committee of the whole for a public hearing of persons interested in the proposed resolution of formation for a special tax district, number 2014-1, establishing the Trans-Bay Transit Community Facility District and determining other matters in connection, such as a resolution determining the necessity to incur bonded indebtedness, a resolution calling for a special election in San Francisco to submit the issuance of the special tax, incurring the bonded indebtedness, and establishing the appropriations limit to the qualified electors of the City and County of San Francisco. Excuse me, Mr. President, to the qualified electors of the Community Facilities District.
Thank you. What I'd first like to do for this hearing is acknowledge the district supervisor for some opening comments, and then if the administration has any comments that they would like to make from a staff level, and then we'll open it up to public comment. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, President Chu. I'd just like to make a motion to continue these items for 1 week to the following Tuesday, September 9th. I know that we've already noticed the hearing, so we will be taking public comment on this item, but we wanted additional time to be able to brief all the offices on this issue, but also have some additional time to talk to the multiple parties involved in this election.
Yep. So Supervisor Kim has made a motion to continue this item, seconded by Supervisor Campos. I would just note that this would be a motion to continue the hearing and hold it as open. Before we proceed to that motion, what I'd like to hear if there's any public comment from either members of the public who can't make it next week or have any comments that they'd like to make, because we did notice this hearing for today. Feel free to say a few words, but there will be opportunity next week for public comment on this item as well. So if you wish, feel free to step up and make some comment.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Matt Field. I work for TMG Partners in San Francisco. TMG is one of the many groups that own property in the Trans-Bay area that would be impacted by the proposed CFD. I wanted to take this opportunity to say a few things about the item before you regarding the CFD. First and foremost, I want to express that the parties have been discussing the issue with the city and hope to come to an agreement on CFD terms before a final vote here at the board. Unfortunately, discussions have not been productive thus far. We hope that any time offered by this continuance can lead to a more productive, conversation. We also hope that we have enough time to complete those discussions, and that we would expect that CFD formations like this are typically consensus actions, and unfortunately this one isn't. We do believe that the item before you does contain fundamental changes that have material impacts on projects in the Trans-Bay that weren't anticipated when the board approved the Trans-Bay District Plan and implementation document in 2012, but we do look forward to a much more productive discussion with the city on the details of the CFD, and that can yield a consensus approach going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Bruce Agate. I'm the Vice Chair of the TJPA-CAC and a board member of the South Beach Rincon Hill Mission Bay Neighborhood Association. I'm speaking on behalf of myself and on several of the other board members of our neighborhood association who could not be here today. They are Jamie Whitaker, Matt Springer, and Mike Anthony. Here are the specifics as we understand them. The Transit Center District Plan, adopted in August of 2012, concentrates growth near the new Trans-Bay Transit Center. In exchange for the right to build much taller buildings, which ultimately allows for significant increases in net revenues or profits, the developers agreed to pay a Melrose Community Facilities District special tax to fund their portion of the necessary infrastructure improvements. The annual CFD tax is equivalent to less than 1% of the value of each development project. Unless there is a fundamental flaw in the plan or implementation document, the developers must pay their fair share. If not, these infrastructure costs will be shifted onto us, the taxpayers. Most of the revenue generated by the CFD will help fund the downtown rail extension for the Trans-Bay project and the rooftop park for the Transit Center. A smaller but significant portion of the CFD tax revenue will fund street improvements in the Trans-Bay district to help make the neighborhood more pedestrian and bike-friendly and improve traffic flow. This is critical. We as neighbors are being asked and willingly accept all of this development. However, we must have these infrastructure improvements. Keep in mind, District 6 has the lowest amount of open space of any of the 11 supervisory districts and the largest percentage of the most dangerous streets and intersections in San Francisco. Last, a study published in 2013 and shared with the CAC found that the property within the 3/4-mile radius of the Transit Center District will increase in value by approximately $4 billion. In closing, we ask you to uphold the requirements of the CFD tax as outlined in the TCDP.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon and welcome back. My name is Patrick Valentino. I'm on the Trans-Bay Joint Powers Authority, CAC. I live in the neighborhood, and I'm here in response to the developer's challenge of the community fees under the implementation document. We accept and welcome, and I actually personally like tall buildings in our neighborhoods in exchange for the fees that help us build out infrastructure. Specifically for the Trans-Bay Center, we're looking at a park, a rooftop park, and to bring Caltrain and high-speed rail into the Trans-Bay Center. I don't think we want to spend over $1 billion just for a fancy bus station. I don't think the challenge is, the developer challenge is with merit. I understand there's going to be continuing conversations to come to a consensus on this, but there are significant factors when you read through the documents that make the challenge very much unclear. The rationale and method of calculation of the community fees in the documents are very, very clear. The rates that were provided in the table 5, and the descriptions on page 4 discuss that those were samples, those were not confusing amounts. They also suggested that those rates would change, they could go up or down. Developers had significant input in the process of how these fees were to be calculated. They even came up with a cap that was accepted by the city of 4% on the upside or 4% on the downside. We've seen an increase in values in the area by 4.5%. The cap would cap it at a 4% increase. Also, as the prior speaker just mentioned, the tax rates are within the standard range that we see when we add the property tax together with these community taxes and Melrose fees to stay well under 2%. So in conclusion, I'd like to see the board and the city implement the document as planned. Thank you very much.
Next speaker.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Honorable Supervisors and President Chu. I am Alice Rogers, 20-year resident on South Park. I serve on the board of the South Beach Rincon Mission Bay Neighborhood Association and several other working groups involved in the community. Basically, I support the comments that you've just heard from the people who serve on the TJPA CAC, being far more knowledgeable than I on the details of the document. However, I would like to just say that in the past decade plus, supervisors before you and the city generally have, by their own admission, failed to require that developers share in the requisite infrastructure costs that serve the area of their development. The city, and in this area especially, is now billions in arrears in infrastructure funding. If this original funding agreement fails, this area will fail. Air quality, congestion, and the willingness of people to buy in, to the dense urban core will hang in the balance. Taxpayers are now being asked to foot the bill for insufficient infrastructure planning in the current transportation GO bond and in recent parks and open space bonds. And these funds will not even solve for the existing current conditions. What message does it send to the voters this fall if the city now backs away from a legally binding and negotiated fund formula for once that shares the burden of forward planning? Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Chairman Chu, members of the board. My name is Charlie Lavery with the Operating Engineers Union. I'm here to encourage both the developers, the city, and the TJPA to continue discussions to reach a mutually agreeable and establishment and implementation of a tax district that is essential to the work that's already underway at the Transbay, that's phase 1, and to start phase 2, which will take Caltrain from 4th and King underground to the Transbay terminal and ultimately high-speed rail. In fact, the ceiling of the high-speed rail box will be poured in the next few months. The TJPA has done a great job of identifying and gathering funds for their project. The Mello-Roos tax is an integral part of that funding plan. This is a great opportunity for the city, the board, to continue its commitment to responsible development and to an infrastructure project that will take cars off our streets and passenger load off airplanes. That is from the least efficient mode of transport to the most efficient mode of transport. The cost of the project is going up daily, as is the need for it. Those costs are associated with any delay. Then there's a question of jobs. Operating engineers still have 244 members on the out-of-work list as of this morning. That's 244 workers who are in danger of losing health and welfare and housing. The operating engineers recognize the importance of continued private development in the district and the infrastructure project. Again, we encourage all parties to reach a mutually agreeable resolution to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public that wish to comment on this item? Okay. At this time, as we said before, Supervisor Kim has a motion to continue this item as an open item to next week's meeting. It's been seconded. Any objection to the motion? Supervisor Wiener has a comment.
I have a comment. I just think, I imagine this is going to get continued today, but I have some serious concerns here. And when this matter in a different forum was before us, I believe it was in July, we had a discussion about how when you look at the Mello-Roos, even the Mello-Roos as it's being proposed today, which will generate approximately $1.4 million, when you look at what's going to phase 1 of the project, we're seeing less and less money that's going to be left over for phase 2 for the downtown extension. And every time there's been a cost increase in phase 1, every time there's no longer any money for the rooftop park or whatever it might be, the money that comes in to make up for it comes right out of the downtown extension. I understand that there is a dispute here, that the developers want to pay less than the $1.4 million. They've talked about the $420 million. Even if something of a compromise, quote unquote, that's not my term, it's a term that's being used, is reached, say at $700 million or $800 million or $900 million or $1 billion, every penny of that reduction comes out of the downtown extension. And I can foresee a scenario where this Mello-Roos will produce no money for the downtown extension. And even with what is being proposed right now in terms of what will be left over for the downtown extension of the $1.4 billion, that is still not enough to complete that project. The TJPA still has a whole list of possible future funding streams to make sure that we can complete the downtown extension. And so when we hear talk about, in terms of this Mello-Roos of compromise and finding common ground and consensus, those are all phrases that we all tend to be drawn to, because we all like compromise, we all like consensus, we all want to make sure, try to get everyone on the same page. But in this scenario, what that means is that every dollar of
of quote-unquote consensus is a dollar that's not going to the downtown extension, and then we're left with a very expensive bus station with no train service being routed to it, or at least it's going to take a heck of a lot longer to get there. So I understand there's a desire to have more time. I know the motion is for a week. There was talk of even 30 days. And I just get concerned that it becomes an unraveling of this Mello-Roos and an unraveling of our potential to actually fund the downtown extension, which is such a crucial part of the transportation future network of this city. So I just wanted to put that comment out there in the context of this motion, but also of the overall issue.
Thank you. And with that, colleagues, can we take the motion to continue without objection? Without objection, this item will be continued to the 9th of September, and the hearing will be held open.
That would be at 3 p.m., Mr. President.
It will be at 3 p.m. With that, could you call items 13 to 15?
Items 13 through 15 comprise the second special order at 3 p.m. Pursuant to a resolution adopted July 29th, the Board of Supervisors will convene a committee of the whole for a public hearing of persons interested in the proposed ordinance, the subject matter of item 14, which was referred without recommendation from the Land Use Committee, and item 15, ordering the vacation of portions of McCoppin Street west of Valencia Street for the purposes of the McCoppin Hub City Plaza project.
Let me first acknowledge the district supervisor for some opening comments. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, President Chu. In March of 2013, I introduced the first in a series of legislative ordinance to finally kick off the creation of open space commitments that we made to this part of the Market Octavia area plan, including the creation of the skate and dog park, which opened a couple of months ago in our district to full houses. Today, we are finally moving forward with the final public realm improvement and the package of projects making up the Soma West ancillary projects, the creation of a community plaza affectionately known as the McCoppin Hub. As the city staff that are here today can attest to, it has been quite a long process with the community's tireless advocacy over a decade. The McCoppin Hub, in particular, is a prime example of underutilized open space being thoughtfully redesigned and programmed. Although originally envisioned as a community garden, the neighborhood programming, including a series of successful food truck pilots, if any of you gone on Saturday, and the most recent Activate McCoppin series, helped to push a more utilitarian design that would allow more flexible programming for a diverse cross-section of vendors and community members. Through a series of community meetings, the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development and the Department of Public Works were able to keep some of the landscaping priorities in the design and factor in event-specific aesthetics, such as innovative art pieces designed by the Rebar Art and Design Studio. DPW has also worked hard to ensure that the site is reconfigured and designed to meet all the state and federal accessibility regulations, and what is before us today will help us legally convert the space from a street into a public plaza. The McCoppin Hub is currently under construction, and I know that the neighborhood is eagerly awaiting to have Off the Grid back in the space along with other innovative program. And I just want to thank on the city end John Updike, who is here on behalf of Department of Real Estate, the City Attorney's Office, Department of Public Works, in particular Frank Felice, and OEWD, both former and current, including Kelly Pretzer, Ken Rich, Tamsin Drew, and Robin Havens, who is here to speak on this issue if there are any questions on this item from the board. So just want to thank the city. There is a lot of heavy lifting from multiple departments to make this a reality, and really am excited that we're going to be working to make this a more complete neighborhood for the McCoppin Valencia area.
Thank you, Supervisor. Let me ask if the Department of Real Estate, if you have any initial comments.
Thank you, President Chu. John Updike, Director of Real Estate. It's hard to top that intro. Thank you, Supervisor Kim. I do have a very brief presentation, just to give you a little bit of history and then talk briefly about the items before you today. So as the supervisor mentioned, in June of this year, the board approved what is now Chapter 94, the admin code. That's the city's plaza program. We told you then that the first plaza project you'd see would be what we're now calling the McCoppin Hub. So these items before you now are the vacation of McCoppin Street between the 101 and Valencia. It's rezoning to public use open space and the jurisdictional transfer from the Department of Public Works to real estate. All of that furthers the goals of this plaza program to transform this particular 4,000 square foot space to a vibrant, active, and well-maintained community hub. So the genesis of the plaza is the former Central Freeway Octavia project. As mentioned, an intensive community process has led to a variety of what are called ancillary projects. This is one of those projects desired by the neighborhood and now brought forward. Take a quick look at the property's location for you. And then a sense of before and after, because I think the visual tells the story. It's quite an amazing transformation that has occurred out there. With your approval of these items, we would then be issuing an RFP to secure a long-term steward of the plaza. That's an award process that will return to the board for final approval, and that's pursuant to the plaza program that you previously adopted. In the meantime, given the construction of the plaza was completed on time by the Department of Public Works, and I want to thank my colleagues at Public Works for an excellent delivered project here, but the plaza program legislation took a little bit longer than we originally anticipated. We've creatively processed some interim grant agreements and orders that allowed the plaza activities to successfully commence in mid-October. And that's a shot of the plaza in action on October the 24th. And much more of that to come. That's the whole intent of this project and this item before you. So the area of the street vacation, which is the specific item now in front of you, is shown on this map. It includes accommodations for a bike lane, as well as the modification of the sidewalk on the southerly side of the former McCoppin. As I mentioned, the ordinance also includes a trigger for jurisdictional transfer to real estate from the Department of Public Works upon the perfection of both the street vacation and the rezoning, the separate item before you. I want to thank Robin Havens for really pushing this rock uphill constantly, methodically, persistently. We would not be here without Robin's expertise along the way. So thank you, Robin. She's also here to answer any questions you might have. I'm not going to make a specific presentation relative to the planning item. I'll allow planning department to address that if you have questions about it. We also have Department of Public Works staff here if you have specific questions about the plaza itself. Thank you.
Supervisor Weiner.
I think it's not questions. I was going to just make some brief introductory comments as well. I want to really echo Supervisor Kim's comments, and just this is an area that, in addition to it's in District 6, but basically at the border. It's also an area of the city where I have been spending time there and going through there for 17 years, and it is an area that desperately needs good public space and gathering space. It's an area that's had a lot of challenges, and it's really been coming up due to the great work of a lot of the neighbors and others. And this project it's long overdue. It's just a phenomenal, very exciting project. I want to thank Supervisor Kim for her and her office's leadership in helping to make this happen.
And with that, let me ask if there are any members of the public that have any comments they'd like to make on this hearing. On this hearing, sir? On this issue? Okay, thank you. Any other members of the public have any comments on this? Seeing none at this time, this hearing has been heard. And Supervisor Kim, do you have any closing comments? Okay. Now, given that this hearing has been heard and is now filed on the underlying ordinance, actually there are two underlying ordinances, items 14 and 15. Madam Clerk, could you call the roll?
On items 14 and 15, Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Weiner. Weiner, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed. Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu?
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen? Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell?
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. There are 11 ayes.
These ordinances are passed in the first reading. Madam Clerk, could you please read the in memoriams?
Yes, Mr. President, today's meeting will be adjourned in memory of the following beloved individuals. On behalf of Supervisor Wiener, for the late Miss Nancy Roddick and Mr. Brian Featherlin Higgins. On behalf of Supervisor Yee, for Miss Nancy Carlin Tracy. On behalf of President Chu and Supervisor Kim, for the late Mr. Zach Watson. On behalf of President Chu, for Miss Mary Atchison. And on behalf of Supervisor Kim, for the late young Miss Miana Gregory.
I want to take a moment and thank SFGov TV, Charles Krimenak, and Nona Melkonian for your services today in bringing this broadcast into the homes of San Franciscans. And with that, Madam Clerk, is there any more business in front of the board?
That concludes our business for today, Mr. President.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.